So after the fall in Genesis chapter 3, things went from bad to worse, and they did so very rapidly. The first sin ever recorded in Genesis 3 is a sin of what we might call simple disobedience. Don't eat of that tree, and they did. Then the next recorded sin is murder, where Cain killed his brother Abel. Cain brings an offering that is not acceptable to God because it is a bloodless offering, and it is just some of his crops, not the best, whereas Abel brought the best. And Cain becomes jealous then of Abel because God has accepted his offering and has not accepted that of Cain's, and he kills his brother Abel. And so humanity has now begun already to reverse the creative act of God that we saw in chapters 1 and 2. And so sin continues now to escalate rapidly from simple disobedience to murder to then it just metastasizes, you might say, all over creation. Sin grows. Genesis 5 traces 10 generations of the faithful line of Adam from Seth to Noah. Sometimes the genealogies are here. They always connect the dots between one period of time to another, and sometimes they serve almost as like a fast forward from this part of the story to that part of the story, but they give those links. And the long lives of the early humans, we see, hundreds of years of life. They may be attributed to the slowly decaying effects of sin in the world. And then after the flood, the ages of Noah's descendants that are recorded gradually shortened. And so we see these long lives, and then the flood happens, and then lives get short. And then they kind of what we have today. It's not within 10 or 15 years for a long time. So there's not a lot of change there. Genesis 6 to 9 is the story of the flood. So the Bible comments in Genesis 6:1 that men began to increase in number on earth, and daughters were born to them. And you have this kind of thing that people have spent a lot of time about, where the sons of God in verse 2 saw the daughters of men were beautiful and they married any of them they chose. People have made much of that. Or the sons of God angels and the daughters of men people, and are there these kind of half-breed people or something? The easiest way, and I think the most direct way to translate that and understand it, is the sons of God are the descendants of Seth, who are the faithful line that will be traced down, and the daughters of men are Cain's line, and those are the unfaithful. And so the sons of God marry the daughter of men. The broad statement in chapter 6 is that humanity has become depraved. There is universal wickedness. God sees how great man's wickedness on earth has become in verse 5, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. It's terrible. And so God decides to destroy his creation and reboot and restart. And so he selects one man who's the only righteous man he can find, through whose family he's going to rebuild creation, and he instructs him to build a floating barge. And Noah was then to gather a male and female of earth's animals, and along with his family at the command of God, they're going to board the ark. And that's how God's going to restart creation. Now, the question is always asked, well, how did Noah get those animals in the ark? Like, did he go all over the world? Well, no. Genesis 6:20 tells us 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. So God sent the animals to Noah. That's how they got there. Now, some question how the ark could be large enough to hold 2 of every kind of animal. So there's some little figures here that I found some years ago. If authorities in biology estimate there are less than 18,000 species of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians in the world, we could double that number to allow for known extinct land animals. So that's where we just get 26,000, just doubled what we know. Allowing 2 of each, that's 72,000 animals on the ark. However, we also know there are 7 of clean animals and birds, so we need to expand the number some more. And since we've already doubled the number, we'll just add 3,000 for the sake of argument. So we say there's 70 2,000 or 75,000 animals on the ark. Okay, that's a lot of animals if you're thinking elephants or cows or something like that size animal. Well, okay. With the dimensions of the ark, there is approximately 1.5 million cubic feet of space. That's equal to about 522 livestock cars. One livestock car can carry about 240 sheep, or the ark could hold 125,000 sheep. The average size of land animals is less than sheep, and so it seems that there would be room for all the animals because God didn't necessarily send full-grown adult animals to the ark. And so the math figures out that no more than 60% of the ark would be used for animals, allowing for area for food storage and small living quarters for Noah's family. So that's always interesting to see that it could work. And I've never been to the Ark Encounter up in Kentucky, but a lot of y'all have, and they explain all that there and help you see, oh, okay, it could work. And, the ark also wasn't just a little bitty, minnow from Gilligan's Island either. So the Bible tells us that God would send this great flood that would have a cleansing effect, would destroy all life outside the ark. The rains came, Noah and his family and all the animals were in the ark for over a year. And so if you look at how it all falls out, the rain falls for 40 days, then there's 110 days that the water rose, 74 days the waters occupied the earth, 40 days Noah sends out a raven, 7 days Noah sends out a dove, 7 days he sends out a dove a second time, 29 days interval, and then there's 57 days elapsed until the end. And so they were on that thing a long time. And then the flood passes, the land dries, the ark rests upon the mountains of Ararat in modern-day Turkey. And Noah is told by God to be fruitful and multiply on the earth. He and his sons' families are told that. They're told that in 8:17 and in chapter 9, verse 1. God places the rainbow in the heavens to be his covenant with God, stating that he will never again destroy the earth by a flood. And of course he says, I've hung my bow in the heavens. And if you think about a archer's bow, that bow is now pointed upward instead of downward. God brought the judgment through the flood. Now he's making a promise that anything else he will take care of. So it's a little bit of a foreshadowing that God's going to take care of sin in his own way in the days to come. Now, the question was the flood really worldwide? There is good evidence for that. Flood traditions can be found in the history of every ancient civilized culture. Now, they'll be a little different here and there, but there's some subtle things that are the same. There's a collection of 46 flood legends from North to South America, 20 from Asia, 5 from Europe, 7 from Africa, and 10 from the South Sea Islands and Australia. So all over the place. We also have found marine fossils on top of mountains. And we know that there are a lot of fossil fish beds that are all over the world. Also, we find that a lot of time the dinosaurs that we find are in these big burial altogether, which is also an evidence of the flood. And there's way more that we could go into. Those are some interesting discussions when creationists help explain the geological layers and that kind of thing, and try to explain how can we get millions and millions and millions of years in this way, but maybe it wasn't that much. So that's a discussion for another day. But Psalm 104 helps answer the question, where'd all the water go? That's an awful lot of water to just evaporate. But Psalm 104 says that the water went back down into the earth. And so we know we have underwater aquifers. And of course, when the flood came, it says the waters came down and came up. And so that's how there was enough water to flood. And then the waters went away. We get to the end of chapter 9, or the first part of chapter 9 in verse 3 of chapter 9, and man is told now that he can eat meat. And so we assume that mankind was vegetarian before the flood, but now he can eat meat. So we now have a family that is rebooting creation. They've been told to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so then the question is, are they going to do it? Well, for a little while. And so they start out going and moving out. Genesis 10 gives us the earliest record of the existence of the origin of the nations. And then in chapter 11, we have this story of the construction of the Tower of Babel, where it says that the whole world had one language and a common speech, and as men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there, and they said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, and then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." In other words, let's not do what God told us to do. Let's just stop right here and do our own thing. And so that's what they do. And then God basically says, "I told you to scatter over the earth, so I'm going to make sure that you do that." And so he comes down and he confuses the languages. We have the birth of all the languages of the world, or at least some of them, and they have to group by their different languages, and now they spread over the earth. So at the end of chapter 11, we now have various nations scattering and scattered all over the world, and we have this stage set for the rest of the Bible. We now know how the world was created, that God did it. We know how man and woman were created. We know how sin came into the world. We know that sin is a big problem in the world because it escalates very quickly. It spreads over everybody. Even after the world is recreated in the flood, sin is still there, and sin still causes people to rebel against God, so much so that God has now confused the languages, and we now have nations all over the world. So, creation, sin problem, mankind, nations. All right? And that ends chapter 11, which is called the primeval history. That sets the stage for all the rest of the Bible. Chapter 1 through 11, we can say, deals with the world of men as a whole, sets that backdrop for the world. From then on, we focus in. And we're interested now with one particular group of people. In Genesis 12, we're introduced to the father of those people, and that is Abraham. We call this period the patriarchal period because we're looking at the fathers of the nations. And so in Genesis 12, we see this patriarchal period, these fathers, these leaders, and so these important people appear. Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Jacob, and then we're going to focus on Jacob's son Joseph, and then we're going to trace the rest of the lineage of the people of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, through the rest of the Old Testament. We trace the lives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph in the rest of Genesis, and it's kind of like the spotlight shines on one, and then the next, and the next, and in these interesting little epics of their story. We're going to watch one nation, Israel, who are going to come from Abraham. And we're going to eventually focus on one tribe within that nation, which is going to be Judah. Because then from one family within that tribe, the family of Jesse, we're going to have come the Messiah. So we're setting all of that stuff up, even all the way back in Genesis chapter 12. So the remaining 39 chapters of Genesis summarize the lives of the patriarch. You have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and then we're going to focus on Joseph. So let's look at those as we go through. First, starting with Abraham. The importance of Abraham is great in the scheme of biblical history and really in the scheme of the entire world because of the influence that he has had. He's mentioned 308 times in the Bible, 234 in the Old Testament, 74 in the New Testament. God gives more detail about Abraham than he did the origin of the entire universe. And so he's obviously a very important figure. We know a lot about him. He was born and raised in an area called Ur of the Chaldees. And he wouldn't stay there, though. He was going to come and start a new nation. He's called by God to get up and move. And so I want us to look at that because we have to understand his call. Look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and following. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem, and at that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. So God comes to Abram, who will later be called Abraham, tells him to leave Ur and just go to a land I'm going to show you. That's an amazing thing. And there's two major elements of Abraham's call, and that is the threefold command. You're going to leave your country, your people, and your father's household. Threefold command. That's a pretty stout thing. Hey, look, get up and leave everything you know. And then, though, at the same time, God gives the promises. And there's way more promises. There's sevenfold promises as opposed to three commands. And so I want to look at that. Look at the command there to threefold. Leave your country. That's to leave Mesopotamia, the area where he was. Then leave your kindred and father's house. That's your tribal group. And that was difficult to do in that day and time because you needed to be with your tribe. They protected you. You shared resources. It was very important for livelihood. There is the question, somebody say, well, why does Abraham take Lot? Is that a rebellion against God? No, Abraham was legally responsible for Lot because Lot's parents had died. So that was like taking on his own child. And then go to this place where God would show them. So in these commands, there is an element of sacrifice. You're giving up home. There's an element of danger in that you are leaving the protection of your tribe. There's the element of the unexpected. Abraham is a relatively old man at this point to be making such a change, and it can be hard to adapt to major change. And then there's the unknown, which part of the unknown is that God apparently is relatively unknown to God, to Abraham. One of the interesting things about Abraham and God is that it's kind of like, how did Abraham know about God? It's almost like God just appeared to him, led him, and Abraham responded. Because the people around Abraham at the time, up in Mesopotamia and Ur, would have been worshiping a god called Sin, not sin that we do, but S-I-N, the god Sin. And they had a polytheistic culture, which means many gods, yet Abraham's going to be monotheistic. He's going to have one God. Be very clear about that. And so somehow this unknown God speaks to this man. This man responds. And so Abraham is sometimes described as the classic man of faith because he put total trust in a God that was unknown. It's like, blessed are those who have believed and have not seen. And that's what Abraham did. Abraham, as far as we know, had no scriptures. He had no traditions that could help him get to know God. He just had God. And so he then will obey. God promises this sevenfold blessing. I will make you into a great nation. That's the first promise. Great can mean great in numerical value, or it could mean great in influence and importance. Well, God would give Abraham both. He would have descendants as numerous as the sands on the seashore, or the stars in the sky. So the number would be there, but he'd also have influence and importance in the world. In order to be a nation, you need two things. You need people and you need a land. Abraham has neither, as God is calling him. God just says, take what you have, go to a land I'm going to show you. I'm going to make you into a great nation. How am I going to have people? How is one man at 75 years old going to have a lot of people, a whole nation? How am I going to have territory. Well, God's going to end up giving him the land of Palestine, Canaan. Now, think about this for just a moment. Where we've come from in Genesis already, Adam and Eve were cast from the garden. The land was taken away from them. Why? Because of the sin that had been committed in the garden. When the flood happens, the land is taken away. Why? Because of sin in the world. The nations are scattered across the world. They can't stay at the land where they had gathered. Why? Because of the sin that they committed. But now, one man is going to grow into one nation who are going to have one land to be given. And the reason is for grace and redemption. That all peoples could be blessed through that one nation. And so that's the first part. I will make you into a great nation. That's the first blessing. The second is, I will bless you. The word bless that is used there is that the word barak. God will be to Abraham whatever Abraham needs him to be. I will bless you. Number 3, third promise, I will make your name great. Well, that certainly happened because Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace their roots back to Abraham. The 3 large religions of the world, which the majority of the world follow, representing billions of people, all trace back to Abraham. His name is great. Now, obviously, Islam was not in the original plan. That came as a result of Abraham and Sarah jumping the gun on God, and Abraham sleeping with Hagar, and then having Ishmael. We'll get to that story. So the third, I will make your name great. The fourth blessing, you will be a blessing. Number 5, I will bless those who bless you. And number 6, I will curse those that curse you. That's still why today we want to support the land of Israel. We don't want to be the cursed. We want to be the blessed. And then number 7, all people on earth will be blessed through you. And in some ways, that's the most important blessing because that impacts everybody. I'm going to do through you, Abraham, what is necessary to change the course of human history. And so we're going to start moving now from this decreation that's been happening to a recreation. From a destruction by sin to now we're going to start having a remedy for sin come out. We're still going to see plenty of sin. We're still going to see plenty of problems. But God's going to start implementing His plan. And so it's with this passage and event that God starts the plan of redemption of Jesus that will be the ultimate outcome of these promises. So the initial response of Abraham is, verse 4, a tremendous act of faith. So Abram left as the Lord had told him. That's huge. He may have had doubts and concerns. We're not told them. He may have questioned God. We're not told that. All we know is he went. It is an amazing response of faith. Faith is not what we have. It is how we live. So you can say, I know all this stuff. I have faith. Well, no, faith is how you act. You act on your faith. It is relational. It's walking with God on a daily basis. If you live by faith, you are living in a life of obedience to God. You're trusting Him. He called me to do this. I'm going to take the step and do that. He says I should do this. I'm going to do that even though it doesn't make sense. I'm going to trust Him. I'm going to live that way. Commitment is an obvious ingredient of faith. Elton Trueblood said, the Christian is the person who bets his eternal life that Jesus Christ is right. And that is part of it. We're just saying, no, I believe that's what's going to happen. I'm just, you know what? I'm putting all my bets right here on Jesus. And that's what we do. That's faith. Abraham steps in on faith. Now, does he always stay 100% faithful? Not at all. There is faithlessness in the midst of faithfulness. And that's true for all of us. Well, about 8 to 10 years pass. Abraham is about 85 years old. He's in the land, but he has no nation. No land of his own. So Abraham tries to do something that he thinks will help get things going. And so look at chapter 15, verse 7. Well, back up to first part of 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. And then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. And so Abraham is trying to take this into his own hands. And God says, no, you don't need to do that. Now, we can do the math as well. We can understand Sarah's 75, Abe is 85, and he's going, we're supposed to have a kid. This don't make sense, God. And God, so I'm going to have this relative of mine be my heir. And God says, no, that's not what it's going to be, because I have made this promise with you. And now he takes him out. They look up at the stars. He says, look, if indeed you can count them. There's probably not anywhere in America where you can go outside and see all the stars. But way out in Africa, right, Mike, Linda, you can see jillions and jillions. And that's probably the closest you can get to the kind of stuff Abraham was able to look at. Because we have so much light pollution, almost anywhere you go in America. Even if you get way out in the country, there's some city that's close enough to mess it up. But he says, look at all those stars. You can't even count them. That's how your descendants are going to be. And then God makes this covenant with them. Abram says in verse 8, sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So God does with Abram what's called cutting a covenant. You take these animals, you put them on the side, and the parties of the covenant would walk through them, and basically they're saying, may I be like these animals if I do not keep my covenant. If it was a two-way covenant, both parties walk through. If it's a one-way covenant, only one party walk through. This covenant, only God goes through in this smoking fire pit with a blazing torch and passes through to represent God. This is a unilateral covenant that God is making, where God is saying, this is going to happen. I'm telling you what's happening in the future. I'm looking down through your descendants, and here's how it's going to be. But, so that's a pretty cool thing. I mean, if God showed up to you like that, you'd have some faith. But at the same time, you're still 85 years old. You're still supposed to have a child. And guess what? You still got to keep waiting. And he waits and he waits and he waits. And so in chapter 16, he has some disbelief. And so that's where Sarah says, well, you could sleep with my maidservant and have a kid through her. And Abram's like, oh, that sounds great. And so they have a kid. And then you have Ishmael. And then, of course, you have the rivalry between Sarah gets jealous of Hagar. And it's never a good thing. There's polygamy in the Bible. There's these maidservant children in the Bible. It never comes out good. So some people say, well, God never condemns it. There ain't a good example anywhere. The only good example is when you do it God's way. So they have, God then reaffirms his promise to Abram in chapter 17, and he changes the names from Abram, which means exalted father, to Abraham, father of many, and Sarai is changed to Sarah. Still mean the same. In chapter 21, finally, Isaac is born. And he is the son of the promise. Isaac has been described as the mediocre son of a great father because his story is kind of like beep in the Bible, and then we move on to Jacob. Isaac meets his wife Rebekah. Isaac prays that God would give him and his wife children. She has the twin boys Esau and Jacob. Jacob comes out grasping the heel of his twin Esau, and that pretty much sets the stage for those two boys' life. Jacob is the heel grabber. He wants the first position, and he will eventually get it. But that's also because Esau devalued the spiritual things. He devalued his birthright, so he sells it for some stew. His blessing is stolen by Jacob in that little scheming that we talked about a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday morning. But Jacob ends up having 12 children. He's one of those. He marries Leah. That's the whole story I don't understand. You know, Laban tricks him. Jacob's in love with Rachel. But Laban does a switcheroo on him at the wedding. And he marries Leah. And they go consummate the marriage. And they wake up the next morning. And he's like, oh, snap. That's Leah. I'm like, how you not know, man? I mean, I know it's dark, but really? Lots of wine. Yeah, there's some wine flowing. And so anyway, then he's like, oh, and Laban's like, well, you can marry Rachel, just work for me another 7 years. So he's like, okay. So now he's got 2 wives. But then Leah can have children. Rachel's not having children. They got maidservants. So what ends up happening, he has 6 children by Leah, 2 by her servant, 2 by Rachel, and 2 by her servant. It's some messed up stuff. But that becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. The 2 children of the favorite wife, Rachel, are the 2 favorite children, Joseph and then his little brother, Benjamin. They're the 2 youngest. What ends up happening is, because Joseph's the favorite, the 10 older brothers despise him. They make a plot to get rid of him. They sell him off to slavery, just get rid of him. They tell their father, oh, he's died. Can you imagine? That's terrible. And there's Jacob thinking his sons died. But meanwhile, of course, through the providence of God, God raises up Joseph to be second in command of all of Egypt. That's a fascinating story, which it would take us till Christmas to go all the way through that one. But God builds him up, highs, lows, hills, and valleys. But God sets Joseph up as second in Egypt. He helps Pharaoh prepare in years of fat for a famine. The famine hits the land. Egypt has food. Nobody else does. Jacob's sons go to Egypt to get food. Joseph recognizes his brothers. They don't recognize him. He plays some shenanigans with them. But eventually, he moves the whole family from Canaan to the land of Goshen in Egypt, a fertile land. They're sheep herders, they're farmers. So he sets them up in a great place. And that's where Genesis really ends, with the family growing. Everybody's happy as a clam. Things are going good. And now we're building a nation, because we're just 70 people that go into Egypt. That's not really a nation. That's just a family reunion. So they go down there into Egypt as 70 people. But when we come into Exodus, we're going to have hundreds of thousands, millions, so people. We're going to have the people for a nation, but then we're going to have to go get the land. And so that's where we will head into next time.